Welcome back, everyone. That was a very quick break, but I hope you were able to freshen up or do the things that you needed to do in that 10-minute break, rest your eyes. But welcome back. We are now down to the last part of our agenda, which is we're going to recap and have a preview of the things lined up for you on our last day of the ILO symposium tomorrow. For now, to give us a summary, a recap of the things of the productive discussions that we had earlier, let me now welcome Ms. Rizal Melville, National Project Coordinator. Please take it away, Ms. Rizal.
Thank you, Tricia, and good afternoon, Caribbean colleagues. I'm so pleased that you all joined us today for day 2 of our Caribbean Resilience Symposium. We've had some amazing conversations, some exciting contributions, and we really do welcome the feedback that you've been sharing with us throughout the sessions. So we kicked off our main technical session this morning at around 11 a.m. Port of Spain time, which is -4 GMT, looking at the challenges and opportunities related to research and data collection, and of course, that contribution to comprehensive disaster preparedness and recovery processes. So led by our labor market and employment specialist, Diego Rey, we heard several technical presentations from eminent academics, as well as other international development partners who are working with our constituents in the region. So, for example, one of the first presentations we had was from Mr. Eric Strobel, a researcher, university academic, on socioeconomic research and how the study of impact of disasters on the Caribbean labor markets is very important for us. So, given the accepted reality that our region is susceptible to frequent shocks, whether they're climate related or in the case of the current pandemic, his central proposition to participants was that by improving our understanding of the economic nature of shocks, we can iterate faster for improved ex ante and ex post mitigation policies. So, of course, sharing his researcher's perspective, he looked at what the existing body of work in the region was. He identified some of the gaps in terms of availability and quality of the data sets. He even looked at some of the research methodologies and the partnerships and funding needs that we have. And of course, gave us some key recommendations on how we could address the shortcomings and constraints that we face. Our IDB partner and consultant and collaborator over the past couple years of doing the Resilience Project, Mr. Dieter Bierman, he also shared his technical presentation with us, and he looked at how international development partners could continue to support the innovations in survey and administrative data collection within the context of such systemic shocks. So the point in his presentation was that timely and accurate data is critical for policymaking, both during and after the crises. And so, of course, he spoke about the necessity for supporting targeted relief, reinforcing our safety nets, and that data facilitates those actions. When looking at systemic shocks, natural disasters, it is difficult in such contexts to collect the relevant and timely and representative data. But that's where it's important to have forward-looking data collection exercises. We have to also think before such things happen about how we take that action. So he also proposed and shared with us some of the methodologies that could be used that looked at both online and phone surveys, greater extraction of data and analysis from administrative records, and of course, merging both various methodologies to create more powerful tools. We also benefited from a very in-depth case study from our colleague in Grenada, Mr. Halim Brizan, where he looked at how Grenada went about collecting labor market data for disaster preparedness and recovery, and of course, shared with us some of the challenges and trends that they would have encountered in the context of COVID-19. Now, in his case study, and he focused primarily on looking at the labor force survey and labor market needs assessments exercises in the context of the pandemic. he pointed out that some of the key factors that constantly affect our ability as national institutions to fulfill mandates, including things like insufficient human capacity, incomplete or outdated tools and databases, and especially outdated legislation. But he also pointed to some of the existing strengths which can be built upon. And that includes some very solid, good practices that are in keeping with international standards. The fact that there are qualified and expert staff in these statistical institutions. And of course, the fact that there are several international partners who continue to support our national institutions. Now, again, in the context of the pandemic, social distancing and other public health measures have been affecting the traditional face-to-face and data collection methodologies. So he spoke about using some of the multimodal approaches, right? And of course, including COVID-related modules in some of the tools that are being used to gather data. Now, one of the key points that I think that emerged in that discussion or exchange was that the availability of data also improves our countries' and constituents' chances of accessing credit and funding for further recovery and development. Now, we were thrilled with the comments and exchanges that we had in the context of that discussion. And some of the comments that were shared pointed to the fact that there is need for greater effort at multilateral level to foster collaboration, to build more robust management systems, to support labor reforms and current trends that we're observing in the labor market. And of course, because we are living in an era where we've been forced to adopt and adapt in a more agile manner to the technologies, the recommendation about using bots to conduct surveys, online and through the various social media platform was one of the points of discussion. So make sure you tune into our recordings to get the details of that first presentation. And then a little bit later this afternoon, we actually had a thematic discussion on labor market policies for recovery, focusing now on the role of public employment services and public employment programs. This particular session was moderated by two of our specialists, Mr. Ray, the labor market and employment information and employment specialist, as well as Mr. Ariel Pino, who is our social protection, occupational safety and health specialist at the office. And we had, again in this panel, some expert presentations from collaborators that have been working in the Resilience Project for the past 2 years. So Omar Rodriguez would have shared with the participants his contributions on the role of employment services in the response to natural disasters, and looked at the opportunities that these services can actually have to contribute to post-pandemic recovery. Now, employment services were considered a key part of any country's arsenal for responding to and recovering from the disasters, once they're operating within the framework of a coherent crisis response framework. These employment services could be involved in all stages of disaster response, preparedness, response, recovery, and of course, restoration towards resilience. So what was important, what emerged as an important point was the fact that we need agile transitions to keep between the different employment services. Employment services during normal periods where we maintain normal operations, and employment services for the disaster response. Of course, while keeping in view the priority of staff safety and business continuity. Our colleague from Devinvest at headquarters in Geneva, Michael Liukisong, also shared some additional information on public employment programs that can be used as a tool for building an employment-centered recovery. And a lot of persons shared the view that it was indeed the responsibility of government to create jobs. And he examined how we could use this to plan for and recover from a crisis to the mutual benefit of individuals, as well as the wider society and the economy. So public employment programs as part of a wider employment and social protection policy can be done in response to a crisis or as part of a longer term counter-cyclical employment policy. And in fact, I think what an interesting point that Michael shared was that PEPs were in fact considered in the very first convention that the ILO established at its point of inception almost 100 years ago as member states looked at recovering from the World War. So this is not something new. The ILO currently provides its members with technical support for designing, implementing, and evaluating what we call employment-intensive investment programs. And these have been initially in the infrastructure development and environmental work sectors. Because at the end of the day, these programs are seeking to create the right balance among sometimes competing objectives, protecting the poor and vulnerable, creating employment with its benefits, and or improving the quality of life for persons while facilitating access to markets. So we had a new term that some of us added to our vocabulary. We have a trilemma to deal with when seeking to benefit, when seeking to balance those competing objectives. Nonetheless, it was an engaging and exciting discussion, and we had quite a few contributions, including from our trade union counterparts and constituents who shared their own lived experiences in terms of the challenges that they're currently facing in country, and the fact that the labor market policies, active labor market policies, need to be closely examined, not only in the context of our current response and supporting persons during the crisis, but in terms of how we prepare for the resilience period, for that period when we want to restore our stability. So that is just a very quick high-level recap of some of the really exciting and interesting discussions that we've been having on the issues relating to Caribbean resilience. Tomorrow, we want to invite you to join us again, to log in early and join us for the sessions which are going to, on day 3, focus on the following issues. So we're going to start off with sharing some of the research findings and conclusions and recommendations that would have emerged from ILO-funded research on the impacts of disaster and crisis preparedness, response and recovery actions on trade unions in the Caribbean. Now, this research was focused on St. Lucia and Dominica, but of course, the findings and the lessons learned and the recommendations extracted can have significant bearing for all of our Caribbean counterparts. We're going to also be unveiling the findings of a green business case study, which was led by our colleagues at the UE Open Campus. And that green business case study actually looked at the current situation of green businesses in St. Lucia, Dominica, and Guyana. And we're very thrilled to be able to share those findings with you. We're also going to be taking an in-depth look at, with our partners from the IDB, at some of the main findings in a recent report that the ILO would have collaborated on, which focuses on jobs in a net zero emissions future in Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm sure you would have heard in previous sessions reference to a green recovery in the Caribbean. And so we want to provide you with some technical insights on what that would require and what that might look like. And then, of course, we're also going to be having some contributions from our UN Environment Program partners who would share the presentation on the Bridgetown Declaration that was issued at the end of the 22nd meeting of the Forum of Ministers of Environment of Latin America and the Caribbean. And then at the end of day 3, we want to conclude our symposium with a tripartite discussion on some of the key issues and key recommendations that would have emerged during our 3 days of engagement on decent work for peace and resilience in the Caribbean. So I thank you for your time and for your patience, and we look forward to some further engaging discussions and exchanges. And we invite you to continue to visit our website, recoverytoresilience.org, where we have quite a few materials, reports, research, and resources that you can download and refer to continue the discussions and investigations on this important topic. So to all of you, I wish you a great afternoon, and I want to thank you one last time for your participation and continued attention. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rizal, for that very comprehensive recap. We surely picked up a lot of insights and useful tools from today's discussions that for you for future plannings and action steps moving forward. Once again, we would like to show our appreciation to our presenters and panelists for the in-depth discussions. And of course, to all of you, our dear participants, for your thought-provoking insights. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow for another day of fruitful discourse. For now, enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you and see you again tomorrow.